During the Second World War, Ukraine was governed by various regimes. They succeeded one another, resulting in different wartime experiences across regions. Each national and social group experienced the war uniquely. Even the war's onset occurred at different times across modern Ukraine's territory. Still, these diverse experiences shared extreme violence as a common element. Soviet memory politics either erased or demonized the experiences of many groups. This led to a memory explosion and competition between collective memories of the Second World War after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Scholars term this competition memory wars. This video examines them in detail. Ukraine has at least 5 distinct narratives about the Second World War. First, the Russian version is based on the Great Patriotic War myth. It legitimized Soviet power and now serves Russia's geopolitical struggle for hegemony. Second, the Jewish version is grounded in Holocaust memory and a culture of repentance. Third, the Western Ukrainian version focuses on the heroic struggle of the UPA and the OUN for an independent Ukrainian state. Fourth, the Polish version invokes the memory of Poland being a victim of Nazi Germany, the USSR, and Ukrainian nationalists. Fifth, the Crimean Tatar memory centers on the Soviet-era deportation of this people. Since 2005, efforts have been made to integrate these narratives into an inclusive national account of Ukraine's Second World War experience. Nevertheless, the Soviet version, the Great Patriotic War myth, remains most influential. The influence is easily explained by Ukraine's 45-year incorporation into the Soviet Union. Russia actively promotes this myth today. Why is the Soviet or Russian Great Patriotic War myth dangerous? By calling it a patriotic war and dating its start to June 22, 1941, the Soviet Union distanced itself from its role in starting the Second World War. This myth conceals the non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany and presents the USSR's occupation of Eastern European countries as liberation from Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union presents the war as a just struggle by the Soviet people for the freedom of their socialist homeland and independence against fascist Germany and its allies. It claims that the Red Army played the decisive role in defeating Nazism, with the USSR suffering the greatest losses. Victory supposedly stemmed from the friendship of Soviet peoples, led by the Russian people. The emphasis on the Russian people's role and the Soviet Republic unity overshadowed the Holocaust. Instead, Soviet civilian population became the primary Nazi victims. The Soviet authorities refused to distinguish the suffering of Jews. Liberation efforts by Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Latvians, Crimean Tatars, Chechens, and others were branded as collaborationism and bourgeois nationalism. The negative attitude towards the Ukrainian liberation movement and Ukrainians in general was encapsulated in the Soviet term Banderites. This word is derived from the name of the OUN leader Stepan Bandera. In the Soviet Union, this term represented the highest form of Ukrainophobia. The Soviet narrative divided Ukrainians into outsiders, the bad Banderites, and their own, the good Soviet loyalists. Meanwhile, Ukrainians who fought in the Red Army received insufficient recognition for their contribution to defeating Nazism. The world saw the Soviet Union as the victor, traditionally associated exclusively with Russia and the Russian people. In the memorial space, the Great Patriotic War memory manifested through monuments to Soviet soldiers. The first marble and granite memorials appeared in Vienna in 1945, Chernivtsi in 1946, Berlin 1949, and Lviv in 1958. These monuments demonstrated Soviet imperial presence in newly annexed territories. Moscow, however, only installed its unknown soldier monument in 1967. In the 1970s to 80s, huge memorials, such as the Motherland Monument in Kiev in 1981, were constructed. They symbolized Soviet might and victory. Monuments to fallen Soviet soldiers became mandatory in every Ukrainian town and village. State erected, these monuments also became sites of personal mourning for many families. A tradition emerged where newlyweds laid flowers at Soviet war memorials. These monuments hosted annual rituals, primarily Victory Day celebrations on May 9th. Children and adults ceremoniously laid flowers and honored veterans. Capital cities held evening artillery salutes. Anniversary years featured military parades. At the same time, authorities ignored civilian victims' memory. The first Holocaust memorials, erected by relatives and activists, often bore neutral inscriptions to peaceful citizens who fell victims of occupiers. By the 1970s, civilian war memorials had to align with the dominant narrative and symbolize resistance and struggle against fascism. The 1976 Babin Yar monument exemplifies this approach. Its artistic imagery omits Jewish victims, instead depicting heroic figures of a prisoner of war, a sailor, and an underground fighter. The focus on victory obscured the war's tragic aspects, including terror and Stalinist repressions. It created a triumphant war narrative, concluding in conciliatory victory. As we have already mentioned, the collapse of the USSR weakened the Soviet cult of the Great Patriotic War. The memory of war veterans, which had been long silenced and banned, came out of the underground. Post-Soviet Ukraine rehabilitated Holocaust and Stalinist victims, and the OUN and UPA figures. Holocaust memorials appeared at Jewish execution sites, beginning with the Menorah in Kyiv in September 1991. Western Ukraine erected symbolic mounds commemorating the First and Second World War military formations, including the OUN, the UPA, and their leaders. Meanwhile, Ukrainians continued celebrating Victory Day and other Soviet war-related dates. New participants joined, such as prisoners of war, concentration camp survivors, and former Ostarbeiters. Anastasia Goulet, head of the Ukrainian Anti-Fascist Resistance Fighters Union, regularly participated in State Victory Day celebrations. Ukrainian victims of Nazis represented the state at international memorial events, with Igor Malitsky regularly attending Auschwitz and Mauthausen liberation commemorations. Ukraine later added commemorative dates to restore historical justice and recognize previously forgotten or ignored war victims. They are Independence Day and commemorations of Holodomor and Holocaust victims, Roma genocide, Stalinist repressions, Crimean Tatar and Western Ukrainian deportations, liberation movement participants, and the Ukrainian insurgent army. Russia has transformed May 9th celebrations and Red Square military parades into their main state holiday, demonstrating power in Eastern Europe through Soviet victory references. They use the Great Patriotic War memory to force unity in the post-Soviet space. Holiday events include memorial actions and public spectacles like the Immortal Regiment March, where people carry portraits of war veteran relatives. Russia's Victory Day has become carnival-like, evolving into a military patriotic performance. Honoring the soldier of victory has become a militant ancestor cult, culminating in the construction of the main cathedral of the Russian armed forces. This great victory cult is a response to what Russians consider inadequate international recognition of their role in the Second World War. Russian authorities consistently tried to control commemorations of the Great Patriotic War in Ukraine. Events interpretation became a loyalty test for Ukrainian presidents, especially after Putin's rise. Until 2015, the official Ukrainian government and presidential documents used the term Great Patriotic War. Though it was renamed Victory Day over Nazism in World War II, May 9th retained Soviet symbolism until its cancellation in 2023. Since its 2014 invasion, Russia has been actively using Great Patriotic War rhetoric, posters, and symbols to justify the aggression. Ukraine seeks distance from Russia's narrative. In 2014, Ukraine introduced the poppy flower symbol for May 9th celebrations, shifting focus from triumphant victory to war tragedy awareness and victim commemoration. As Russian anti Ukrainian armed groups in eastern Ukraine and Crimea used the ribbon of St. George as a great patriotic war symbol, Ukraine banned its use in 2017. Ukraine introduced May 8th as Day of Remembrance and Reconciliation in 2014, shifting emphasis from victory triumph to war casualties. In 2024, this became Ukraine's primary Second World War commemoration date. Russia's full-scale 2022 invasion catalyzed a radical reassessment of Soviet monumental heritage. Regional and central authorities began dismantling Soviet monuments, including the monument to General Vatutin in the center of Kiev. In 2023, Kiev's Motherland Monument replaced its USSR emblem with Ukraine's trident. These changes symbolize departure from the Soviet past and emphasize Ukrainian national identity. Ukraine and Russia have waged memory wars over Soviet Union heritage for at least 30 years. How to name the war? Second World War or Great Patriotic War? Heroes or traitors? Liberators or occupiers? Which participants deserve remembrance? Unlike Russia, Ukraine chose responsible remembrance, allowing internal discussions and diverse war narratives from various participants and victims. One might argue that Russia lost this metaphorical memory war and thus started an actual war, which became full scale on February 24th, 2022.